You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com, thechrisvossshow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another podcast, and no, I am not taking up opera. That's just the way we always enter the stupid show. But welcome. You're always welcome at the Chris Voss Show. Everyone is always welcome as long as they're good people, though. The bad people are not welcome on the Chris Voss Show. But if you're listening in, hopefully you'll learn to be a better person if you are a bad person, and if you're a good person, you'll learn how to do better. I don't know. It sounded good at the time when I improv that. So anyway, guys, we have a most excellent guest. We always have the best guest, Chris. That's what everyone tells me. They go, Chris, why does your podcast always have the best guests? And I go, I don't know. They just show up. It's amazing. But we book them, and probably that's part of it too. So anyway, we've got a most interesting guest. This guy has got a journey that you're going to want to hear about, and it's quite extraordinary. It's quite unique, and I think it's going to blow your mind because normally I'm not like a big poetry sort of guy. I know it's hard to imagine that, heavy metal, Van Halen, Metallica sort of guys into poetry, but we're going to find out. So let's do that. Between now and then, be sure to go to our new book club that we just launched, I think 3 days ago. It's called patreon.com/Chris Voss. It's a book club we're launching to talk about all the different things that go on our podcast, the different interactions we have, the background on some of the authors. Hopefully we're going to have some different contributions, maybe some book giveaways, and different things that we might do with them in the future as we build it. So go to patreon.com/Chris Voss, hit that subscribe button and subscribe to us so you can get all the wonderful details of what we're doing there. YouTube.com/Chris Voss if you want to see the video version of this wonderful gentleman we're speaking with today. And there you go. We're going to be talking today with Brian Sonia-Wallace. He is the author of the new book, The Poetry of Strangers: What I Learned Traveling America with a Typewriter. You're going to love this story. He has been described as a creative genius by LA's Department of Cultural Affairs and disappointingly normal by the New York Times. His debut book, The Poetry of Strangers, which came out earlier this year, tracks his journey across the country writing poems one-on-one for over 5,000 people as a poet in residence for Amtrak, Mall of America, a political campaign, and more. His company, Rent Poet, was featured on NPR and NPR's How I Built This, and Brian's writing has appeared in The Guardian and Rolling Stone and more. Welcome to the show, Brian. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Dude, I talk to authors all day long. We talk to, politics, and we talk about news, and there's a lot of people who write really brilliant novels. This is really a first. I don't talk to a lot of poets, number one, but you have an extraordinary, unique, and very cool sort of story. So let's get into it. What are some plugs, actually, where people can look you up on the interwebs first?
Sure. So I'm in most places as Rent Poet, R-E-N-T Poet. The joke I always make is as in it is due. And it's people always hear Rent a Poet, and I'm like, no, it's Rent Poet, and we'll get a little bit into the origin of that story and the company name, but I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all of that as Rent Poet, or you can look me up as Brian Sonia-Wallace, also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and BrianSoniaWallace.com, rentpoet.com for the interwebs.
There you go. So give us an origin story on you and what drove you to write this book.
Sure. So the book came about really with the Amtrak and the Mall of America residencies in 2017. And I had been doing this weird thing for, I guess, 3 years, full time at that point. In 2014, I had a job and I was laid off and had spent about 6 months job hunting. Graduated, I'm a millennial, graduated mid-recession and sort of did that early career sputter start. And after about 6 months of job hunting, I had heard a story on the radio about this weirdo in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco who would bring a typewriter out and write poems for people. And I thought, well, I can do that. And so I took it out. At first I was like, well, this is, going to be a fun experiment that I do for maybe a day. And ended up just getting this incredible response from people when they had the chance to share a story with someone calling themselves a poet behind a typewriter.
Wow.
And I had written poetry and stuff before, but I didn't set out to be a poet. I wasn't like, yes, this is my thing. I, studied sustainable development. I'd been working in nonprofits. And so what also ended up happening is that I realized that I was making enough tips that if I did this every day for a month, it would be about the equivalent of taking a minimum wage job, which is what I was considering doing. And so that's where the rent poet part comes from. So I set out in 2014 to pay my rent through writing poems on the typewriter for folks. And fast forward 3 years, people started sort of taking notice, and I actually got these sort of strange corporate residencies and companies wanting me to come in and work with their clientele and do poems for them. And based on that, the publisher reached out and was like, maybe there's a book in here. And I went, oh, you think so? Like, yeah, let's find out. And so it's been this bizarre chronicle of adventures and misadventures with the typewriter. Everything from working on a political campaign to visiting a trans witch collective in Salem, Massachusetts, to, posting up at the Mall of America and writing poems for shoppers as a kind of roadside attraction. So it's roadside attraction poetry. I always talk about it as service poetry. I'm not in the ivory tower. I'm not, managing anything. I'm just sort of there like a shoe shine boy. But instead of shining your shoes, I'm gonna, do a little like emotional shoe shine.
So you started out and you're there, I guess, in the park or something with your.
Yeah, I started out. It's the best context that I found were always street festivals, which it's ironic in COVID time. So it's like farmers markets. I live in Los Angeles, so we've got a lot of taco truck festivals where everyone's carrying cash and drinking.
That's probably key. Get that cash, that cash crowd.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, bars are great. I mean, where the company ended up going was a lot of corporate parties.
Wow.
And it was something that was a little bit different and a little bit interesting.
That's pretty cool. That's brilliant.
And totally without advertising, totally just from like meeting folks on the street who were then like, oh, my law office is having a Christmas party. Do you want to come on Friday? And at first I didn't even know to charge for it. I was like, no, I'll just take tips. And then I was like, wait a minute, people get paid money for this. This is insane.
Yeah. I used to know this guy in Vegas who looked exactly like Tom Jones. I think he had some work done, but he looked like Tom Jones, pretty close naturally before he had his work done. And he would make like just stupid money at corporate events to go do Tom Jones covers and do the act. And I would just be like, why don't people just pay Tom Jones? And like, he's too expensive and he doesn't have time. He's doing Vegas, baby. And so, yeah, corporate money. There you go. So why a typewriter? Why? I mean, as a millennial, you probably grew up on something else. When did you touch your first typewriter or come up with the concept of a typewriter?
God, I think I was probably 22, 23. I definitely did not grow up with them. My mom actually worked in IT when I was growing up, so we always had the like newfangled tech. We had the, switched from floppies to CDs early on. But the typewriter is a weird thing, and because it's antiquated, because it's out of place, especially when you see someone on the street or at a party or in a public setting with it, I think it codes differently, right? Everything that we do, everything that we wear is a code, is sort of eliciting a response from someone else. And if you're sitting out in public with a notebook or a computer, you're saying, stay away from me, I don't want to talk to you. But if you're in a public space with a typewriter, like, you are begging people to come up and ask you what the heck you're doing. And so for a long time, and I still don't have very good signage. Like, my signage is really minimal because the typewriter is the sign. The typewriter is the sort of siren's call. And the great thing about it as well is it makes the noise. So not only do you have a visual, but people as they're walking past are hearing this and either having a memory jogged or, you know, for kids and folks who didn't grow up with typewriters, it's like something out of a movie. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, this is a scene now. We're doing a scene.
Yeah, it has that very, very kinetic sound, ching, 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 and then when you do the, well, I think it was the ding of the bell and stuff. I don't know if that isn't in yours, but I imagine that one of the beauties of using a typewriter is you're writing poetry for people, so you've got to print it off and hand it to them, right?
Right.
You can't do that with a cell phone. Well, here, let me email that to you. And there's no real satisfaction in email. I mean, there's something about the tactileness of it. I would guess.
And it's funny because I've done a couple of events now in our new, you know, post-pandemic Zoom apocalypse, using the typewriter on Zoom and doing these interviews and writing for people on Zoom. And there's something really beautiful about that. There's a corporate event I did at the end of June where I had people in offices in Australia and the Philippines and Amsterdam and, you know, across the world all sharing this same experience. But there is something I think that you lose when you don't have that physical thing. And one of the coolest things for me is that I will run into people and, you know, I say over 5,000, and that's because I don't necessarily keep track, but it's significantly over 5,000 folks who I've written for.
Wow.
I will run into people and they'll say, you wrote me a poem 4 years ago and I've got it on my fridge, or I've got it like on my bedstand framed. Or there was right after the pandemic happened, I had a corporate client just Venmo me some money and I was like, what's that for? And she was like, oh, we were sharing our home office setups on Zoom and someone had your poem next to their computer in their home office setup and I thought of you.
Oh,
and,
wow.
You know, wanted to make sure you were doing okay. And so it's this cool thing where it's, and that's, I think, also why it is interesting in some way to companies, because how often do you go to a party or just go out and then come back with something that you're going to keep for that amount of time? So I think of it as almost like a photo booth with words, or it's that similar effect. People are able to kind of capture that snapshot.
And there's the typography of it. I mean, there's real tactile nature to typewriters, and fortunately, I grew up with them. Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know if it was better or worse. But I do have to tell you, I've talked about this before. The one most important thing that I learned in high school and in all of my college, or all of my, I didn't go to college, clearly. In all of my 12 years of schooling, there's one significant class that made a difference in my life, learning to type. And mostly because I went into business. And so being able to, you know, do the QWERTY type or whatever it's called was really important. When we started our first business, I would, you know, sit and hammer out the invoices, and the next week my partner would have to do it, and he would be sitting there spending all weekend henpecking the keyboard. So I was always glad that was something I learned. I wasn't really that excited about it. I think I had to take typing class. Either a gun was to my head or it was like the only class left or something.
So this is actually a little bit of how I started poetry. I was, I think, 10 or 11, and I was just the worst typist. I had no patience for it. I was terrible. I didn't practice. And my mom set a hard and fast rule that I had to type a page a day. And I realized that poetry has line breaks. And so you can type a page of poetry in about 15 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And so in some ways, and what I do now is really speed poetry. You know, I'm talking to someone and they're not going to hang out for 2 hours while I compose, you know, the next like song of myself. They're going to hang out for maybe 5 minutes. And that's about the space of time that I have to write something. But I think in a lot of ways that like 10-year-old, 11-year-old year that I spent speed typing poetry to try to get out of typing practice was really the start of it.
That's funny. So when did you write your first poem?
I I mean, probably around that time or a little bit before. I actually just moved houses, and one of the things that I'm really enjoying is I have a couple of boxes of old journals and doodles and whatnot going back to when I was 10 years old. And so it's cool to get a chance to reconnect with the past in that way and to kind of just do that spring cleaning of the self. But I do remember, I'll share this little bit with you. I wrote a poem around that age to my mom's spaghetti that I still remember.
Ode to spaghetti.
Ode to spaghetti. I love my mother's meat spaghetti with its bits of cheese confetti. You know, it's not Shakespeare. But it's something.
That's up there. That's Walt Whitman-ish. I don't know. So when people ask you to write poems for them on the street and through your different activities, what do they normally ask? Is it personal? Like, do they want something for themselves, to tell something for you to be descriptive about them, or for about them to, or you for write maybe about a subject that isn't about them, or what is it normally, majority-wise, I guess, about?
That's a great question. People normally are pretty open, and I try to keep my question as open-ended. And one of the interesting things is there are people doing this practice all over the country, right? There's probably not a ton, but there's probably 50 folks, and I know all of them now across the U.S. and more broadly who are doing this. And everyone has their own way of approaching people. And mine is, I always ask, what do you need a poem about? And there's a couple of things in there. I like the verbiage need instead of want, because it's this idea that you do need a poem. You maybe don't know it yet, but like, this is something that you need. This is something you should have.
Everyone needs a poem.
Everyone needs a poem. That's actually my little, it's on all my business cards. It's everyone needs a poem.
Everyone needs a poem. See, there you go.
Yeah, ahead of the curve. But so subjects, people will either get, I always ask, do you want one for yourself or for someone else? And so a lot of people will get one for a romantic partner or a parent or a kid, or about, their family. When people want them for themselves, it's a whole range of things. Everything from, I've had people tell me intimate personal stories about, medical stuff that's going on with them or mental health stuff that's going on with them. And equally often, my least favorite but omnipresent poems, you cannot have a gig go by without getting a request for a poem about someone's dog.
Really?
That is perhaps the most universal thing across the country, whether you're in Tennessee or Massachusetts or California or Arizona. Everyone wants a poem about their dog.
Which is funny. I have 2 dogs, but they can't read for crap, so there's that.
I always wonder, like, what happens to these poems?
What are you going to do? Go and read it, your dog?
It's actually, so after about a year of despairing about dog poems, I decided to lean into it, and I went and there's a few collections of everything that famous poets have written about dogs, and I was like, let me read what other people are writing about dogs, because I'm out of material.
Yeah, when my dogs passed, there were people that sent me beautiful poems, and they did some artwork and the Rainbow Bridge and stuff like that, and it was really beautiful and thoughtful. I imagine you can make a lot of money sitting outside of a rose shop at Valentine's Day, asking people poems written for their...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of Father's Day, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day. It's definitely it's a seasonal kind of occupation.
That's awesome. I think it's really cool. So you wrote about your stuff. Now, how did you get this gig with Amtrak where you're the poet in residence? How did that work out?
It's all, so I think a huge boon to me as an artist, as a sort of entrepreneur, has been a past life as a grant writer. Because there are all these online applications, and even with Amtrak, I don't remember where I first saw it. I think it was a news blast that someone sent out. The residency with Mall of America was a Facebook post that someone shared. And so in some ways it really is these long shot, weird things. And I didn't, at least before now, I didn't have the literary credentials to get into sort of formal residency programs and all of these, prestigious writing, whatever. But I always feel like I kind of came in through the side door because, Amtrak doesn't care about that. Mall of America doesn't care. They want something that's going to be engaging for people. They want something that's going to be literary, but also really draw people in. And I have started talking about my stuff a little bit as like social practice poetry, with the idea that it's about the lens that you look at it with, right? Like this isn't poetry for you to go, like, let's look at the meter and the line breaks and think about what they mean. Like, the line breaks are mostly determined by when I get to the end of the little 3x5 card I use on the typewriter, and I go, well, that's the end of that line. And there's some, some intentionality to it. But really, and what the book is it's about the stories. It's about the stories that people share, and it's about the communities that people want to represent in this poetry, how people identify, how people, like, what you claim. I always think about that idea, like, what are the communities that you claim for yourself?
Mm-hmm. And it was interesting how you found, and there was something in your writing where you talked about people were striving to be heard, or people were striving to have a voice and try and find it. If you can expand on that.
Yeah, I think that what surprised me, and it's foundational to the whole practice, I think, is the idea that people just really want someone to listen to them. And we live, it's sad, but it's true, right?
Hang on, what? No, I'm just kidding.
We live in this age where we're like constantly putting crap out. Like, we are writing on Facebook and Twitter and posting, and there's just this explosion of production. I mean, one of my favorite facts is we're writing more than we ever have in human history. Now, are we more literate than ever in human history? Maybe, debatable.
Depends on if you look on Twitter or not, I guess.
Exactly. But, like, even sharing memes, right, is a form of writing, a form of curating, a form of, like, putting together your own personal book of your life in public for everyone to see. And there's the thing that I think gets kind of lost in that is that ability to just kind of sit down, and particularly with a stranger, I think that's an important factor too, to have someone who you don't know, who's able to, some people joke, they're like, this is like therapy. And I'm like, well, like, if you want to use it as that, you're welcome to. I don't have a license. I can't prescribe you meds.
Look forward to the forthcoming Chris Voss book, My Autobiography and Memes.
I'm sure someone's done that. If they haven't, they should.
What you were saying leads me into the question I had set up for you was, I mean, do you feel like you're a little bit of a psychiatrist? You kind of have to do a little eyeball on people and go, what should I write about this person? Or do you are you kind of like a bit like a psychic where you draw some information out of them first?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, some of my favorite moments are where when I'll write something, and like what comes to mind is there was a poem that I wrote over quarantine for a woman who had two sons. One was graduating high school, one was graduating college. Neither were getting graduations. She's like, write me a graduation poem for these boys who are not getting graduations. I'm like, sure, that's an easy task. Let me just do that emotional labor for you real fast.
Emotional labor, I like that.
But and that's actually something I think that's a therapy.
I'm gonna start using that term when people are being stupid around me. I'm like, are you giving me your emotional labor, you idiot?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I get the number of people who I'll have be like, write me a poem, and my response is always, give me money. This is my job.
Starving artists.
Right. But so this woman, the poem I wrote for the older son, I talked about the idea of Kansuki, which is the Japanese art when like a historical urn or vase or something breaks. When you mend it, rather than trying to make the cracks disappear, you mend it in gold. So the cracks are all filled in with gold. And this was sort of the central metaphor of this poem of like, well, the world's broken, but like, let's not pretend it's not. Maybe we can put it back together in a better way. And at the end of that, all of our correspondence had been over email. And she said, oh, you had no way of knowing this, but I'm actually Japanese American, and that's my ancestry, and that's my family.
Wow.
And so there's little moments like that where it's just like, oh, cool. There's something, I don't particularly have any superstitions about what's going on there. I think it is coincidence, but it's cool when that happens. The nice thing in what I do is I get to ask follow-up questions. Like, I'm not trying to look at someone and say, I've decided the future of your life. Mostly what I do is I say, what are you doing with your life, and what would you like to be doing, and what's going well. Often I'll ask for a specific memory, so the poem is kind of centered in space and time in their own experience.
Mm-hmm. So that's basically how you better connect with an audience, right? You use the 3 easy step program that you mentioned.
Yeah, so I have these 3 steps that in doing this practice over and over again, I've kind of come up with. The first one is open the floor. I think that the typewriter does that really naturally for me, but it's something that we're all doing. And again, now in Zoomtopia, is a challenge. How do you start when people are logging in here and there and everyone's, making sandwiches while they're on their calls? I know I am. But opening the floor.
This just in. What Brian is doing on his Zoom calls.
Creating that the number of calls that the camera will be moving. It's like, just go into my fridge, don't mind me.
As long as we don't hear a toilet flush, we're okay. That's when it gets that's when you become famous on Zoom.
Just gotta mute it. But yeah, it's that remembering that, right? I've only had that happen once, and it wasn't in a hyper.
Yeah, it was kind of funny how those are all popping up.
Oh God, right?
Yeah. So have you ever written a poem for someone and then they got it and they went, I don't know who the hell you're talking about right here. This is me?
No.
Well, there you go. You must be a good judge of character. I remember one time I got a card and I was at the end of a relationship with a girlfriend who I was trying to get to move out, and I got this card for my birthday that's like said all this stuff that was nothing compared to anything she had been saying to me recently, because we were in the throes of breaking up, and and I opened the card and I read it, and it was such a sorry word. It was such a juxtaposition from where we were and the things she was saying to me, and basically her opinion of me that she was verbalizing. And I was just like, did you read this damn card when you bought it, or did you just buy any?
Had she written in it, or it was just like the message on the card?
Yeah. Basically, you just phoned it in. You picked up any card that said "Happy Birthday," because I read the inside and I was like, "What the?" And so I always read the insides of cards because I'm like, do I love this person as much as this card says? I don't know. So that's very interesting.
Is this Hallmark card accurate to my feelings?
Is this accurate to how much I either hate or like them, or kind of I'm on the fence? I don't want to tell them I love them too much unless I do or don't. But you gotta be factual. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
You don't want to send the wrong signals.
The only poem I ever remember refusing to write was I had a guy come up to me and he was like, "Can you write me a poem to get my girlfriend back together with me?
Oh.
She's inside. We just had a fight." And I was like, "Nope, can't do that."
You can't do that. So there's a line.
I will not promise you that this poem will fix your relationship. Like, if
so you'll do the poem. There's no guarantees on this, baby. Yeah, you might have to have some legal disclosure on some of these, maybe.
Actually, I have a friend who made me a little sign that sits next to my typewriter that says something like "no refunds."
No refunds. If you find you aren't the person that I wrote about, or the person that you give this to does not like it, we are not to be held responsible in any way, shape, or forms. All sales are final. And so companies, this is a question for you. Companies are increasingly looking at employee creativity. Any creativity hacks that can come from your work and your experience?
Sure. I think that the big takeaway for me is that we have this weird idea of creativity as something that like exists in a vacuum, or something that, people are creative. People are like these magical beings, and that's what creativity is, rather than the idea that creativity is just like what happens when two unlike things meet each other and have a dialogue. Like I always use the metaphor of a metaphor, which is comparing two unlike things and finding they're the same. Like, sure, your love is a mountaintop. Why not? How are those things related? And I think that's where creativity is looking at two things and finding that sort of middle ground. But I always think about that as being in conversation. And everything that I'm doing, if I was just coming up with stuff off the top of my head and giving it to people, they wouldn't care. So to get them to care, to make that creativity useful, it's about talking and listening to what another person is saying and kind of applying your different mind to that situation, to that person. And I think that does translate to all sorts of situations. And I think that really, if you want creativity, I do some creative writing teaching as well. One of my favorite tricks is I'll just give people arbitrary things that have to appear in their writing. I'll ask for 5 random words, and I'll just say, great, now you're going to write a poem, and these 5 words have to appear in this poem in this order. That's it. And just that task of trying to work your way between unconnected concepts, I think that's where creativity happens. I think that's where it lives.
Maybe you've opened up a new avenue of psychology, that, or it's a metaphor for life, that the real poetry of life, the real beauty of it, is that we should actually listen to each other and get to know what the hell we're saying, which is
look at you. You started this saying I'm a metalhead, I don't know about poetry, and now you're waxing about the real poetry of life.
Yeah, I'll do Shakespeare next in a bit here, something like that. Oh, Horatio, I don't know. So this is really interesting to me. I mean, this is really cool. You put a lot of thought and process into this, and you discovered some interesting things about the internalization of stuff. One thing I saw talked about here is a lot of people seem to ask about stuff that they love, whether it's their dogs or other people, or maybe it's themselves. I know a guy you can write a lot of self-love poetry about in the White House. That's, and he's got the money for it. You might want to consider that. But you could just write poetry. I love me, and I love more of me. See, look, I'm a poet right there.
That's it. There's actually a book. This is an odd plug, but there's a book of Trump quotes that have been given line breaks and turned into poetry that was put out a couple years ago. That exists.
I use that anytime I have food poisoning and I need to extricate stuff from the body. Read a little bit of that. Actually, I think I've seen enough of that poetry on Twitter, so there's that. I think it's really cool. I watched a Zoom call that you did with a whole mess of people. You did like a 2-hour Zoom call that was interesting. And you guys were interacting and the artistry. Would you say that one of the things that's lost in our world, where we're always looking at phones and consuming, and like you say, we're the society that we've probably been given too much democratization of voice, because people want to spew every BS thing that they have coming through their mind. I mean, 90% of my stuff is that. But a lot of it's gobbledygook that no one really wants to hear, or no one cares. What was that old line from Fight Club? We buy things to impress people who don't give a shit. Maybe the same can be said about our blogging and stuff. And so I think it's interesting you found this depth where people want to be heard, and they're so desperate for it. Like, one thing I always like now is I kind of enjoy calling people. And I come from the age of where I used to call people, but I actually kind of like it now, because people are kind of like, hey, you're a human being? Oh, hey, we're going to talk? Oh, cool. This is like really novel, And back in the old days when I used to sell stuff, 5,000 people were calling a day, and the guy had his thing up. So it's easier to close deals usually if you call people. But I think it's interesting what you found and what you wrote about in your book, where all this stuff. So did you spend? So Amtrak did you do most of your traveling around America with the Amtrak thing, and then eventually you got to the Mall of America, or how did that sort of evolve?
Yeah, it was a mix of different travels that I talk about here. So Amtrak was a significant chunk of them, and I tried to link together a lot of different places on the Amtrak. And then there's other ones where I, drove out or flew out, or I flowed out.
Flew out.
I flowed.
Flowed.
Thinking about what you just said, one of the people who made a big impact on me was when I was on the Amtrak. Opposite me, in the little roomette, which on the website they're like, it's like a hotel room. It's more like a closet. was this 95-year-old guy named Oren, and he was really smug because he was going solo on the train to visit his brother who was 96, and he was like, my brother has a caregiver.
Was that a one-up on his brother then, he was thinking?
Oh yeah. He was like,
Wow.
I'm independent, I'm solo traveling on the train, but just this guy who talked about serving like around World War II, and getting to sit with him and talk with him for 3 days on a train. One of the things that really came out from that was the idea that you don't have to leave a mark on the world to have a good life. And I think we're all so obsessed, and like I'm one to talk, right? Like writers are the most obsessed with this. It's like, my legacy, this book will be an imprint and it will stand the test of time and never burn. But like, no, of course, there's how many thousands of books published every year. There's so many people speaking. That I think there's something very comforting in this idea that like, hey, like not everybody has to hear you. Not everybody has to, you don't have to be Mark Zuckerberg. You don't have to be the Bill Gates of whatever it is you're doing. You can just sort of, make a positive impact on 10 to 20 people, and that's kind of okay.
Love that idea. That's a beautiful idea. I had one of the Russian authors about Putin on, and we talked about how much money they were amassing privately, the leadership of the Russia. And I was like, honestly, if I was like a despot sort of leader, like I'd like, I don't know, get $1 billion or $2 billion, and then it'd be like, hey, you know what? You guys go have fun with this country stuff. I'm going to another country, so you can't prosecute me for all the shit I did. And then I'm going to go hang out in the Bahamas and chase chicks around the pool or something, But, and, we talked about how there's just this consumption, like I got to be the number one richest guy in the world. I got to be up in the Forbes list. And it's interesting what you just said, where, sometimes we have to make that difference. Have you ever touched someone, like maybe you wrote something and made them cry on the spot?
Oh man, all the time. One of my favorite things, when I was at the Mall of America, I kept a tally because I was trying to have data for them.
Were you trying to make people cry, Brian?
I wasn't trying, but 1 out of every 5 did. 20% of people who
Wow.
I talked to a little over 100 people, and 20% of the people that I talked to cried at some point in the interaction. And this is how I know that it's not my skill as a poet, is that sometimes they'll cry just telling me the story.
Wow.
Like, they don't even need the poem written yet. It's just being able to talk about that and being able to convey whatever it is they're experiencing to someone who is not in a hurry and is not trying to get anything out of it, and is like not trying to be their friend, like I'm not collecting phone numbers and emails and following up. I'm just like, oh, I'm here in this moment to do that. And I do appreciate what you say. I think that there is like this like national and probably global obsession with being number one, with being the best. And I like the idea of sort of, whatever you're doing, it's kind of good enough, right? Like, it's good enough for now for you at this time. And partly, I think people just need someone to tell them that. And I feel like so many of my poems, especially the ones where often it's young people who come up and they're trying to figure life out and they want a sense of direction, or they're, older and they're in the middle of a career change, they're getting a divorce, whatever's happening. And they kind of just need someone to be like, oh yeah, that's a thing that humans do. That's probably okay that you're doing that. Like, you don't need to be killing the game 24/7.
And do you think it's because we don't take that time out to be present? And what you kind of facilitate is a moment of being present, kind of like Eckhart Tolle will talk about the power of now, where you give people a moment, you take them kind of out of their space. They're running around 100 miles an hour doing their stupid stuff, looking at their phone, and all of a sudden there's a guy with a typewriter. This is pretty unique and extraordinary, and he's writing poetry. Like, this isn't something you see at every mall or every place in the corner. And you kind of take them out of that routine that they're doing, and you kind of give them an extraordinary moment of presence, maybe?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'll say also from like a personal, like, I don't know, slightly like snide side of me, it's so great to be able to make people wait because we have the conversation and then I have to write the poem. And like, I always tell them if they want to, go off and get a drink or chat with their friends or whatever, they can do that. But yeah, I just remember like writing a poem for a C-level executive at Facebook. It's like, okay, wait for 5 minutes, and then I'll be right with you.
I'll be right with you. Just
you
wait.
know.
Well, you have to wait because, like, even with like the portrait guys that you see at public places sometimes where they draw your portrait, there's part of you has to sit there and be subjected to waiting, and
Hang
you
out
probably
with your thoughts for a while. It's
probably you have to think about your thoughts. Oh my God!
Don't make me do it.
That's what I do. That's why I'm on Amazon buying everything I possibly can. I don't want to be left alone with my thoughts, left alone with myself. That's interesting. When you do your poems, do you put your name at the bottom of every one?
Oh yeah. I put my name. I put the date. I sign them.
So you have an extraordinary amount of work that's just running around where one day there's going to be, I have this poem in my attic with this painting of whatever. And then there's a poem, and, there might be these extraordinary works of art that will make it into, the Smithsonian or, someplace in France or crap like that.
I mean, this is my long game, right? I feel like books live on shelves, and you read it once, and then you close it, and then you put it on the shelf. And maybe if it really impacted you, you'll take it out and you'll read it again. And the nice thing about having poems on scraps of paper is that people have to figure out where to put them. Like,
that's brilliant.
Put it
I
on
didn't
a
think
fridge,
about that.
put it
That is
on your
brilliant,
wall.
Brian.
And then other people are seeing it as well, and you're reading it every day rather than a book that you read once and put away. You're interacting with this piece of literature, and you're using it as a metric for, maybe the poem was written 5 years ago and it doesn't really apply to you anymore, but it reminds you of where you've come from. And I think that's equally valuable.
It's a mark in time. That's really interesting. I do that with fortune cookies.
Do you
things.
really?
When I was younger, I did. I don't do it anymore. There's nothing attached to the screen now. But when I was younger and I was, searching and trying to figure out who I was and what my job was in life, the fortune cookies, of course, those little strips that I like, they easily tape to the monitor of your screen, because they're just those little thin slits. And so, if I found one that, you're good with money, you're better looking than Brad Pitt, I'd be like, clearly. So we should put that up on the
Let me
thing.
remind myself of this.
Remind myself. But no, I love the beauty of this. It's multifaceted in its I don't know, how would I describe it? You would probably describe it better, but it's so interesting to me. And I grew up in an age where you were bored because you didn't have phones and all this kind of crap. And so you would look at the typing that goes in, the imprint that goes into the paper, and whether it's the topography of the typing or it's the nature of it. Like, I've been helping my mom during the COVID crisis with a lot of her historical stuff, because we've been trying to, she's got all these photos that we've got to get digitalized, and a lot of this material that we've got to get digitalized because, thank God she's never had her home burned down, knock on wood.
Right.
But she has like all this old stuff. And so she literally has like all these old like letters that were typed and everything. I think she has a typewriter somewhere around here. And I took in, but I remember, I used to look at it and you'd feel it, and there just really is a tactile nature to it. Sometimes you just look really closely at the ink imprint and the mark it made and how the ink worked and stuff. And I think, Bill Gates, or not Bill Gates, but Steve Jobs brought typography, I think it was, to
That's right.
the thing. But there's still something I think romantic about the typewriter, and that's probably people drawn to you, is that the romanticism of it. I mean, I know a lot of my author friends, they like to get a picture of them next to like some old 1800s typewriter sort of thing.
Right.
And but yeah, it's really cool. I mean, just the whole brilliance of it. You can pull it out, hand it to people. You don't have to email it to them. There's an instant gratification of hey, I've got a poem. And you should sell frames on the side. That's what you should do. You should be like, hey, you want to buy a frame for that? Because my biggest thing was, I fear is I'd get it crumpled on the way home.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally have a box of frames. That,
Oh, do you?
in
Okay, cool.
In COVID era, there's not much I can do with them, but depending
Ah.
on depending on the context, I'll bring that and have that as an option, or envelopes that people can put them in.
Oh, that's good. That's
and it
good, because
is,
that's a big thing I'd be worried about. I'd be worried to get a. So what is the average cost, if you don't mind me asking, of like if you're working on the street? I'm sure with corporate and stuff you do something different, but if you're working on the street, what were the average prices you used to charge me when you started out, and then when you got going? Because I'm thinking of a second career. So
There you go. Consider street poetry. That's where the
how much
big
money
money's at.
is in here, Brian? That's really what I'm trying to find out. There's something I need to know about? No.
It's a $1 million industry. Venture capitalists. Come
But when
on,
you do stuff on the street, would you mind telling me what you charge for a poem for somebody?
Yeah, for sure. So when I first started out, my sign said, "Give me a topic, I'll write you a poem. Pay me what you think it's worth."
Oh, wow.
And I would not let people pay me beforehand. I would read them the poem, and then there was a very beautiful and awkward moment where we had like a small discussion about the value of art, and that was like I loved that, But also
And was this a bit of a guilt trip, or was it the value of art?
I mean, probably.
Probably.
Let's be real. It probably was. And then I had a conversation with a friend who's like a tax accountant, and he was like, "You should really put an average amount because people just need to know what the
What a
market
range
average
is, maybe.
So then I put your topic, your poem, your price, average $10 to $20. And so on the street, if I'm in a context where people aren't expecting to run into me, I think that what you're prepared to pay for a surprise is like the cost of a sandwich, right? Like that's about the value of a surprise.
Yeah.
Now, if people are reaching out to me to have them, to write anniversary poems or wedding vows or whatever.
Oh yeah, wedding vows. That could be a good business, huh?
I've gotten to know more about the wedding industry than I ever wanted to know. I do a lot of weddings. I mean, not at the moment, but
I have some friends that might want some divorce poetry. Have you done divorce poetry?
oh man, I'm sure I have. Have I? God, I'll have to look through my. I do take pictures of all the poems. I'll have to look through and see if I have a good divorce poem I can send you.
That would be funny. It's extraordinary. But no, it's interesting to what people would pay for that and the meaning of it, because honestly, if I buy a $5 to $10, like I bought a $7 burger yesterday at Five Guys Burgers, plug. I expect some cash for that, Five Guys. And it was a very good burger, I must say. But I paid $7 for that. But that baby's gone. Like $7. Woohoo! Boot. And really, the value of like a poem, like I just keep seeing them sitting in a frame on the thing. I think there's a picture here of some Chinese symbols I have kicking around the office.
Oh, yeah.
I have no clue what they mean, but there's something cool about it. But a poem, and especially where it's written from somebody, like this isn't personalized. I don't know who the hell, like I probably bought this from like the dollar store or someplace. And
Sure.
I was like, yeah, that was cool. You can put that on the wall somewhere. But that's not personal. What you're writing for people is very personal. It's like if I got David Frost to write for me and, I get to, that's a conversation piece where I get to constantly go, hey, David Frost wrote that for me. There you go. And I think it's cool.
For titles for the poems, I don't usually give them their own titles, but I always write for the person's name at the top.
Oh, okay. So they don't get like
that level from square one. You're not like, oh, he's talking about, mountains and stars. Is this about me? It's like, no, it's about you. You're the mountains and the stars. Just connect these dots. If you're not super familiar with metaphor and poetry, that's what's going on here.
It's about you. And if you don't think it is, you might just want to go home and contemplate it. No, I love this. What's interesting, somewhere in the research that I did on you, you talked about how you'd gone all over this nation, and the stories here in the book, which make it quite extraordinary. Check it out, guys. The Poetry of Strangers on Amazon. We'll have a link on the website. But you talked about going to some of the towns that were kind of the Rust Belt or towns that were kind of almost ghost towns now, and you had some interesting experiences there.
Yeah, it's been a lot of like small cities. and really interesting to see how across the country there is this kind of model that everyone's trying to get a piece of the action in. And it's funny because I started my career doing a lot of community development, anti-gentrification work, and going to all of these small towns and seeing them desperately try to attract tech companies, desperately try to attract artists, try to make their town the kind of place where, you know, a startup would relocate to. You know, Chattanooga, Tennessee has some of the fastest Wi-Fi in the nation, and is a tech hub in the South because they've really deliberately invested in public, in like a public utility as a strategy. And it's fascinating to see. I mean, especially in the national climate right now, where it's like, nope, like we're not going to do anything publicly. Everything's going to be private, and we're going to, you know, the market's just going to decide it all. To see all of these small places really working actively to attract that kind of investment, to attract, to kind of make their physical space reflect that broader national trend of kind of what does a space need to be able to bring people in? What does a space need to be able to be exciting? And that was something that was mirrored across, I think, most of the communities that I went to.
So there was, you felt there was a need for more sort of, you know, this artistry, art and stuff like that?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I have mixed feelings about it because I'm like, oh, am I coming in as a tool of developers to try to up property values and potentially price people out? You know, did I single-handedly succeed in doing that? Probably not. Like, I'm not going to take credit for that. But it is something that at least was aspirational in a lot of these places. You know, everyone wants to have high property values and tax revenue and all of that stuff.
Did you find that people in big cities were more receptive to you, or people in like smaller towns are more receptive to you and stuff?
To be honest, it's about the same.
So it's more about the people then?
It depends a little bit on the context of where you're setting up. Like, definitely small towns are more likely to have like a central square. Like, everyone comes here to do their shopping. And so if you set up there, you can exist there. Big cities, you have to do a little bit more sleuthing to find where those central arteries are. And if there are central arteries that aren't tapped, like, I've gone out a couple of times in Los Angeles to like Hollywood Boulevard or Venice Beach, where there's lots of buskers and there's lots of street performers and that kind of stuff. Those areas are not successful for me.
Oh, wow.
Because it's not surprising. People see it and they're like, oh, another weirdo doing this weird thing, trying to make some art, whatever.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Because one of my
food festivals are successful because you know, who's making art at the food festival?
That's true. So you got to go someplace where the thing that's interesting to me about Venice Beach. One of my favorite places to go in the world to shoot photography, not to shoot people, but to shoot photography, is Venice Beach. And I love to go with a long lens, like a 10 to 200, and I think it's 20 to 200. I like to take a long lens, and I like to sit. I usually try and get a restaurant. There's a restaurant that's there, and I try and get an angle where I can sit right by the walk, but I can shoot down long ways. Because I like to shoot people when they aren't paying attention. They're just being themselves. Because if they see you shooting them, then they start going. They either are affronted or they're just kind of like, they start thinking about what they're doing. But Venice Beach is such a beautiful artistic sort of thing. But it's interesting that it wouldn't work as good there because there's so much art. And to me, it's fun. Like I remember one time I went there and I have video of this somewhere. I had so many photos. And I have video of some guy who had a big giant cardboard sign where you could kick him in the nuts for like $5 or $10.
Oh yeah. I remember him.
And so I paid some hot chick to kick him in the nuts for the photo or the video. he was like, but you need to do it. I'm like, no, dude, I really don't want to interact with you in that way. It's not my thing.
Wait, was this woman someone who you knew, or did you like?
No, I'm pretty good that way. I can improv on the street when I'm doing photography.
Like,
and
hey, I want to kick this guy in the nuts.
I'll be like, look, I'm going to pay you to pay, and I've already paid him, and I'll pay you some money to kick this guy in the nuts. And she's like, really? I'm like, yeah. So, but yeah, it's interesting to me, but God, you really have a whole psychology behind this. Any other standout stories you want to talk about in the book that maybe you want to share with us?
The one that I love telling the most maybe is there was this woman who came up to my little desk at Mall of America outside of, Wetzel's Pretzels or whatever, and waited for a while before approaching, and then comes up and says, I haven't really spoken to anyone in a week. I'm just coming from this Tibetan meditation retreat where I was in silence for a full week. And tells me a little bit about that. I'm like, wow, that's, it's really hardcore. What are you doing at the mall? And she says, I came to get Dippin' Dots as a reward for myself. For having done this big spiritual journey, I'm going to get ice cream. That's why I'm at the mall. And I was like, yeah, that seems like a pretty accurate reflection of who we are as a people.
Journey.
Like, right. We're going to go on this big hero's journey. We're going to do all this introspection. We're going to have it be really deep and really spiritual, and then we're gonna drive to the mall and get some ice cream because treat yourself, right?
It's Dippin' Dots, damn it.
Right, but there was something beautiful about that. I think I love the idea. I think it's so easy to moan about everything that's lost in cultural shifts, in cultural change, and I think one of my goals as a poet and as a writer is to also find the things to celebrate, to say, you know what, these two things are not mutually exclusive. There's an irony there, but it doesn't make either one less sincere or less genuine. And people are living really full and rich emotional lives, and the most important place in the world for them is Disney World, and that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
If that's their spiritual pilgrimage that they go on every year, you gotta have some sort of pilgrimage, so might as well do that.
You said some really beautiful things right there. I'll have to go find this piece and cut it out for the trailer. But you said some really beautiful things about how we do so much crap, all day long. We don't say crap. Yesterday I was going through some different things, and I was being told some things that I wasn't excited to hear. And they were about what someone else is going through, and I realized that I didn't want to hear it, but and I started to walk away and pull away, and then I realized that it wasn't about me; it was about what they wanted to tell me, and that they needed to talk to me about this, and it didn't really have anything to do with me, which probably was the reason I was disinterested, which is kind of a shame that we look at the world through that lens. And I just had this aha moment where a light went on and gone, this information is uncomfortable, but this person wants to share this with you. And it's not important to probably them much, other than it probably is important to them because they need to share it. But a lot of times we look at what people share with us is like, okay, well, so what's the value to this? And what's the value to me? You're kind of caught in the crossfire. They're doing their emotional work, and you're just there. Yeah, and so I said, hey, stupid, you need to listen. You need to give some feedback to this person and take 10 minutes out of your day and just listen, man. And so I kind of learned something yesterday. Hopefully I'll remember that lesson. But there's some times where people just need to be listened to, and so sometimes we just need to value different things. I think that's what's really wrong with our society and some different things. We're so busy talking that we don't listen, and we don't have a value to listening, I suppose. I think it's everyone's trying to make meaning in some way. I thought it was really interesting earlier. You talked about when I was young and trying to figure out my life and what I'm doing. And I'm like, oh, you figured it out? What? No, what is it? That's the never-ending journey. You're so right. That is the never-ending journey. I'm still reinventing. When I hit 50 or 52, somewhere in there, I learned so much about life, and part of it was because I had this strewn carnage behind me of 50 years
Sure.
of destruction and creation, but at this point you can look back and see the patterns and go, yeah, there really is a pattern there. Yeah, I might want to seek some help.
I do this. Yep.
and I found out more about me. I mean, I may have found out more about me through this extraordinary podcast I've been doing with you that have just been really enlightening. So anything more you want to plug about the book? We could probably sit here and talk for hours because I've really enjoyed this, but anything more you want to plug about the book and everything?
Sure. I think that the big thing is that idea of showing up for each other, kind of what you talked about. And one of the things that was interesting in writing the book is, especially kind of the later chapters, start to zoom out from my personal interactions with people. And I start to talk about, for instance, there's a woman who visits folks in immigration detention, and there was someone at a detention center who was writing poems, and so part of what she did as part of their correspondence was put those poems together into a book and kind of surprise him with them. There's, folks who are just trying to be artists in small towns and to figure out how to talk to a community, and particularly, small town red state. The arts are seen as something that kind of kids do, right? Like, you do this up until you're 18, and it's very important, and we'll, put you in the after-school club, and then you should have figured yourself out by the time you're 18, and then you get married and you settle down and you do the rest of your life. That happens starting then.
And then you get the divorce, then you get divorce poems.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then you reinvent everything at age 50. But, I think there is something to this idea of how we're present for each other, and especially now in let's see, I had Zoompocalypse, I had Zoomtopia. What's the next Zoom place? Zoom-mageddon? The way that we're able to show up for each other is different, and I don't have a clear 1, 2, 3 step solution for that. But I think that it's something that we're all thinking about now. And I think that it's something that we're all having to really get into. Like you said, like all of a sudden I'm talking with all of my friends on the phone. And I would, I had gotten out of that habit because you kind of see each other on social media. You see each other at events, and like a phone call to catch up is weird. Why would you call someone and just be like, hey, ...
And you have to have your clothes on when you do it. You can't just be walking around your house in your pajamas when you show up on the Zoom call. So I like what you said there. We have to start showing up. You said it earlier, we need to start showing up for each other. I really like that.
And I think like people are, like people are doing it in lots of different ways. And I think that's part of the beauty of what I found in the book was the extraordinary diversity of ways that people are doing that people are building community, that people are showing up for each other. And the silly and stupid context that it happens in. Like it doesn't have to be. I think that we're in a moment right now where we're talking about mental health a lot. I'm a big advocate for artists in particular as we look to the next gigantic recession and cuts to arts across the board, which is going to happen. Artists advocating for and making the case for the arts as part of mental health. But I think that we get in this cycle of saying, well, mental health is therapy and medication. But like it's also gardening, and it's also going for a walk, and it's also reading a book. And so finding the ways that and it's also, going to Disney World, if that's your thing. It's making those pilgrimages that are important.
For me, for a lot of years, it was vodka. So I do have one other question for you. Do you think your experience and what you do and just interacting with so many people, you think that's really taught you more about yourself than maybe what you've taught other people?
I mean, shit, I hope so. Sitting with other people for 5 minutes, I'm sitting with myself the entire time.
I learn more about myself from other people. That's one of the reasons I like doing these interviews is because I like learning about other people. I'm innately curious in them.
trying to describe this book, because it's gotten lumped into memoir, which I think is interesting, because I always thought of it as essays when I was writing it. So I've kind of come to the conclusion, I'm like, this is a memoir in other people's stories. Because, of course, everyone who I'm talking to is helping to kind of sketch the limits of who I am and what I'm doing and what I think, because we exist in those conversations. So when I'm telling you about the person I'm having a conversation with, what I'm telling you is about myself and what I'm interested in them, and where I see myself in their story. One of my favorite things about the whole typewriter custom poetry practice was actually said by... I'm going to be pretentious and call them a protege of mine. And I asked her, I said, how do you know when you're done talking to someone and ready to start writing? And she told me, it's easy. I just talk to them until I find myself, and then I write that.
Wow.
And I said, that's in my book, and you are getting credit for it, but I am going to tell everyone that you said that, because it is genius. So that is Natalie Nicole Dressel is the person who said that, but I just think it's the best summation of this whole, I don't know, thing that I've been doing for 8 years, and someone else said it, so goddamn them.
Why did you choose the typewriter make a model of the typewriter that you used, and why did you stick with it?
So here's the thing about being someone who is known for doing stuff on typewriters is I have probably 30, maybe
Holy
more.
crap. You might want to see somebody about that.
About half of them work, I swear, Chris. It's really hard, actually. So everyone's like, can you find the ribbon? Yeah, you can get the ribbon on Amazon for $7. But
holy crap.
If you want to get it repaired, if anything goes wrong with the mechanics of it, you have to go see, Schultz, who's like a 70-year-old man, German man in Westwood. And he's the guy who can repair. There's like 4 or 5 typewriter repair people in LA who are still left, but they're all, they're all older at this point, and it's very expensive because their time has a premium, and there's 7.
I'll bet. Yeah.
So I
it's extraordinary. There's enough business going around, so that's awesome.
And they're mostly, it's like electronics stores that will have like the old employee who still knows how to do this.
So the one you traveled with mostly,
shops.
Sorry.
Yeah,
the one you travel with was, like I used to own a lot of guitars, and but there was one I would always write with. Like I would always somehow, there was 1 to 2 guitars that were always the inspiration. One was an acoustic, one was an electric. And for some reason, just the juices or creative or the whatever spherical sort of inspiration would flow through those instruments, and like the other guitars were just like, I don't know, screw around guitars or make noise with, or look for a certain fuzz or something out of it. But and sometimes you'd write with the one guitar and then you'd go to the other guitars and see how it would sound over there. Do you find that with a certain typewriter that you like, that's your inspirational muse?
Totally. So the typewriter that I took around the country, which is actually on the cover of the book, was an Olvetti Laterra 32, Italian model, 1960s, 70s. And it's just super compact, super light, fits in a backpack. I would, travel all over with it. My favorite thing is going through TSA with a typewriter. They're always very confused.
They're like, what the hell's going on?
I'm like, do you want me to? And I always tell them, I'm like, I have a
poem?
typewriter in my backpack. Would you like me to take it out? But that one actually, at the end of those travels, I was literally getting back from a road trip, and the case was slightly open. And as I was taking it out, the typewriter fell and smashed against the concrete and broke. So that typewriter that, was sort of the typewriter that all the poems in the books happened on, the little bookend, is actually no more. So I have
every time I see a typewriter from here on out, I'm going to think of you. Whenever I pass a typewriter, I'm going to think of you. It's quite
that curse.
It's a great curse. I've had friends that they tour around and they do photography, and I've been worried in some of the places I've been in with photography. Sometimes I've had to do a little trespassing on government property, not personal property, but government property, to get some great photography. Usually it's at the top of like radio tower mountains, and they got it fenced off, but you want this beautiful shot. Or sometimes you find these old buildings that have these graffiti on them that are really cool, and you've got to hop some fences to do it, and you're just like, I don't know if they're going to confiscate my camera. You can arrest me, but I want my camera back because it's got film in it. So the beautiful part about your typewriter is no one's going to steal it from you when you're on the road. I've had friends had their cameras stolen from them on like train cars in Germany, but no one's going to steal it from you. And then if you need like a weapon, you know, you can kill somebody with a typewriter. Swing that baby and hit them. Well, I really love this conversation, Brian. This is up there in one of my top conversations. I think this is so extraordinary, and the insight that you have into what you're doing is quite extraordinary too, and I'm sure the book is as well. Give us the plugs on where people can buy the book and order that up and get to know you better on the interwebs.
Great. Book is on amzn.to, where everything is, or you can also go to bit.ly/the poetry of strangers, and that's a whole mess of links to find it. You can also find it on my website, briansoniawallace.com. For all business things, rentpoet.com, rentpoet on any of the social medias, you'll find me there. R-E-N-T poet, not rent a poet, just rent poet.
Rentpoet.com. Do you think that by the time you're done, you'll have more with your life, you'll have more poetry out there than, say, Robert Frost or someone, and like after you pass, I mean, God forbid, you pass 100 years from now or whatever, like we're all going to be sitting around going, hey man, we all got to get the poetry together, Brian, so we can compile this stuff in a book. There's like, like I say, it's, you find a Rembrandt in your attic that was under a tarp, and you're just like, it's like, yeah, it's a Rembrandt, that could possibly happen. So you never know. So there you go.
It'll be interesting to see like the afterlife of everything.
Because if I ever got a poem from you and paid you for a poem, I would be keeping it, and I'd just be like, someday this is going to be worth like double what I paid for it. So there you go.
Double. Well,
but from an emotional value, it would be
if it's
worth.
For you, does anyone else care if it's all about your Huskies?
Biggest problem is if it's not for me, like I don't care about anybody else. So there you go.
Exactly. The catch-22 of all art.
Catch-22 of all art. But it has an intrinsic value, so that's what makes it important. So thanks for being on the show, Brian. I'd love to have you back anytime if you want to talk about this, that, or the other. But I think it's an extraordinary journey that you did, and it's wild. You got to tour the nation doing poetry. Like if someone had asked me, like, hey man, you want to hitchhike across the nation and pay your way through poetry, and I'd be like, I don't know about that, man.
That's not
but
work.
I'm not a poet, so there's that. And
I remember I took a picture the first hotel room that I was in that I was ever like, someone got me this hotel room to write poems. It's like document. So excited. I feel like a band,
There you go. Do you get any groupies from the poetry?
I have a couple. Actually, it's on my website. There's the live stream of the book launch, because all events now are recorded in perpetuity. And the folks who I had interview me or do the Q&A at the book launch are actually two people who I met on the street 5-6 years ago, who have since become close friends and collaborators. And there is something really cool about, certainly not everyone. I'm sure there's about half the people I write poems for probably are like, oh, that's cute, and put them in their wallet and throw them away later. But that's a reality I'm prepared for and realistic about. But you do get these people who are close friends now, and it's like, oh, how did we meet? Oh yeah, it was in this parking lot where I was writing poems.
See, if I ever did poems, I'd do it just to pick up chicks and stuff. But I don't think my poems would ever inspire any chicks. They'd be like, "That's really cute, boy," but no. There you go. Effort. Anyway, guys, be sure to check out Brian Sonia-Wallace's amazing book here, The Poetry of Strangers, What I Learned Traveling America with a Typewriter. I think what's interesting about this is what you find in your travels and the experience and what you discover about people or you expand about on your experience with people and what there really is about. We're in such a political time right now. We're in such a diverse time where no one's talking to each other, and maybe this is more of what we need to do is show up for each other and listen more and and be part of a conversation with each other as opposed to just yelling stuff at each other, or we're just tweeting. I tweeted this. I'm not going to stick around long enough for you. I'm working on what I'm going to say next. So there's that. Anyways, be sure to check it out. Be sure to check out Brian online. If you're interested, we're going to be having the patreon.com/Chris Voss. It's a book club we're trying to build where we can have more conversations. I talk about my experiences with the different authors, the books that I read, how we got them on the show, maybe some of the different cool stories about that. We're going to be giving away books and different things and promotions and things. So a whole back end of the podcast that you'll be able to experience. Go to patreon.com/Chris Voss. Also go to thecvpn.com, refer all your friends, neighbors, relatives, dog, cats, mistresses, ponies. Let them all listen to the show. Just play it for the cockroaches when you leave for work every day. Give them something to entertain themselves with. Also, you can go to youtube.com/Chris Voss to see the live version of this. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Be safe, and we'll see you next time.